Chapter 12, Experimental Research. Here are the learning objectives or outcomes. Just what I'm going to do in this introduction is just give a very basic outlook on experimental research. This is a very broad, deep subject. For our purposes for the course, we're going to do simple statistics. We're not going to get involved in this too heavy, and the likelihood of you using experimental research for your project is probably pretty small. But with that said, it's good to understand, or at least be aware of, the issues involved, the terminology involved. This if anything, should show you that most complex market research is done by people that only do market research. It's experts. It's not a once in a while type of thing. But in order to get an MBA, you should at least understand the basics of what's going on. So here are those. So web protocols for financial markets, technology. How does it change things? How can we? And people do way more online than they have ever done financially. So creating an experiment, we've got subjects, human, how do they react in an experimental environment? Independent variable and a dependent variable. Well, independent variable is just that. You can vary it. So let's just say we'll call independent variables advertising. The dependent variable, which is what you're going to measure the effect of changing the independent variable, what that has on the dependent variable. So more advertising, more sales, just as a very rough approximation. But there's a host of different types of variables out there. The main effect, interaction effect. So the difference between a dependent and independent variable, different levels of any single experimental variable. That's what we're after. We're looking at sensitivity. Another term for this, and you may have done this in Excel, is sensitivity analysis financially. It's sort of like doing what ifs. What if we vary this? What effect would that have on a market or on the reaction of consumers? That's essentially what's going on here. We're just trying to figure out what the sensitivity, or if any, exists. So feedback received, current employee, graphs, and this is a huge area. This is a whole study in and of itself, the experimental method. We want to eliminate or hold as small as possible experimental errors, because we want validity in our data. So bottom line, you're going to hear that over and over again. Talking while driving, don't do it, don't text. I'm more concerned about people texting while driving, especially at every red light I've ever been on. It seems like I wait for a while, to get specific, more than one independent variable. This is where we're going to just kind of pause right there. We're not going to get into that, even with further readings where we've got multiple variables going on. But be aware that this is used, very sophisticated tools. So selection and measurement, this is really the crux of the matter, is we need to select carefully what we want to measure, what we want to manipulate, in order to have valuable information produced that we can make decisions with. So should we spend more money on, just go back, on advertising? Or are people more sensitive to pricing, or to certain colors, or to shopping hours, or whatever it might be? Think like decision makers. So then the various errors are discussed. Demand characteristics, demand effect, Hawthorne effect. That's one you probably remember from undergrad. If you know you're being studied, you tend to behave differently. So, and it's you look it up, Hawthorne effect. Kind of interesting little tidbit from the past. People's production and level of work went up because they were being studied, and there was a Hawthorne effect, is what it got called. Demand characteristics. Sometimes you talk about studies that are blind or double blind. It just means the experimental administrator doesn't know who or what's who it's being used for, and double blind means the person or subjects of the experiment aren't aware either. So it tends to increase the validity. So that double blind study. I think that should get you going, consistency, condition, counterbalancing, eliminate confounding effects. I'm not going to go into this any deeper. You can read the chapter. It's pretty straightforward, but don't get lost in it. Think basics like I've described here, and you'll be just fine. But as a reference, the book's a tremendous reference tool for sure.